3-methoxyphencyclidine, or 3-MeO-PCP, is a dissociative that's closely related to PCP. It appeared in the scientific literature in the 1970s, and human use began by the late 1990s, but it only became a widely used drug in the past decade. The effect information in this video comes from reports from around 270 users and those familiar with the drug. Using those reports, I created a summary of the effects, but everyone is different and there's a wide range of potential experiences, so the description won't perfectly apply to everyone. In this video, I cover much of what we know about the drug, but those who want to learn more should read the TDC article, which is available on the website and as a PDF. You'll also find all of my references in the article. Like other dissociatives, 3-MeO-PCP disconnects you from your senses and environment. Bodily numbness and impaired vision, taste, and hearing are common effects. You can also feel separate from your body, almost like you're riding around in some sort of vehicle, and your mind may seem like it's positioned behind your body, as though you're watching and controlling your body in a manner that's reminiscent of a video game. How all of this feels depends on the dose and person. Some experiences are cold, emotionless, anhedonic, and detached, yet others are euphoric, anxiolytic, energizing, disinhibiting, and even hypomanic. This variability can exist for a single user, with or without a dose change. Granted, it's so potent and difficult to weigh that many users may not actually be taking the same amount each time. The positive effects include dissociation, mood enhancement, anxiolysis, increased sociability, analgesia, visual distortions, and a hypomania-like state that may include excessive confidence, high energy, and recklessness. Among the potential negative effects are elevated heart rate and blood pressure, mania, delusions, psychosis, tinnitus, disorientation, dizziness, anxiety and panic, cognitive impairment, confusion, and distressing feelings of emotional detachment and anhedonia. It's commonly described as functional relative to many other dissociatives because users have the energy and interest to engage in normal activities. With relatively small doses, people can be physically active, communicate with others, and almost feel like they haven't taken a dissociative, but this can also cause them to overestimate their capabilities. The feeling of functionality can be insidious because it leads some people to think they can use small doses on a regular basis to enhance daily life, akin to how some people head down a risky path by frequently enhancing their lives with opioids or benzodiazepines. This isn't typical since it's still a dissociative, and most people use it for standard dissociative purposes, but it's a greater risk than usual. Clear-headedness is another descriptor that may be appropriate for low doses, but with larger amounts, there's a good chance that the feeling of clear-headedness is just a trick. You may be impaired, manic, or delusional, yet feel like you're thinking straight, and perhaps thinking even more clearly than normal, which is a good sign you're losing track of reality. Likewise, your overall perception of how altered you are can be very different, so it's common to only realize how substantial the effects were once the drug wears off. Positive experiences often include hypomanic effects. You may feel more confident and motivated, and you may jump around to different activities, ideas, and plans, while also believing you have unique insight, that all of your ideas are amazing, that you're great in social settings, and that you can do just about anything with high proficiency. Of course, since these thoughts rarely match reality, you run the risk of being annoying and embarrassing yourself if you're in a social setting. The key thing about this state is that although the ideas and plans may be ridiculous, you're not so detached from reality as to be at a high risk of harm. But it doesn't take much to tip over into mania and delusions, including delusions of sobriety that can cause you to use more and to underestimate your impairment. Effects like these are not universal, and they're very dose dependent. When these effects are not prominent, you may just feel excessively impaired and dumb, not like a supremely powerful being. Factors that contribute to the risk of mania and delusions include high doses, prolonged dosing, and frequent use. People may have a delusional sense of power, either in the form of thinking they're remarkably intelligent and have access to knowledge that others lack, or in the form of power over reality, such as controlling time or reading minds. Delusions are concerning because once you have a firmly held delusional belief, one that may involve a plan you're supposed to follow, the resultant behavior could be destructive. High doses can also cause weird experiences that are ultimately harmless, like crawling around your house thinking you're teleporting or traveling through time, or making the poor decision to move everything in your room to find something unimportant that you dropped. When detached from reality, it's common to feel more in control due to mania, but people can also become paranoid and feel targeted by a malevolent force. and some users are terrified because they think they're going insane. These severe effects rarely occur with responsible use, but it cannot be stressed enough that with high doses and binges, users have lost track of hours, only to emerge with injuries, lying in a hospital, dealing with police, or having a lot to explain to their friends and family. Introspection can occur, and it may be more likely with common doses. Users have described thinking about their lives, friends and family, and society. This can have a lasting positive effect, though more often people are not introspective or they don't implement their insights. Compared with a dissociative like ketamine, 3-MeO-PCP is more energizing. It's not the same as psychostimulants like amphetamine, but users often feel the need to be active and moving around, so they may pace and do simple activities like cleaning. Usually at light to common doses, some users enjoy outdoor activities like walking and cycling, but impairment still matters with activities like cycling. It's wise to stick with low doses and to remain in safe areas in case you're more impaired than you realize. In other words, don't go cycling in a high traffic or otherwise risky location, and your best bet is to avoid these activities altogether. Some users also find the energizing effect is good for exercise, like resistance training or push-ups. It can subjectively delay fatigue and make exercises feel easier than normal, which isn't surprising since you're partially anesthetized. While this may be acceptably safe for bodyweight exercises at light to common doses, adding weights to the mix is a bad idea when you're on a drug that impairs balance, coordination, and perception of strain, and the increase in exercise capacity is an illusion caused by failing to notice overexertion, which may result in injury. Likewise, yoga and stretching can feel nice, but you should not push those movements beyond your normal capacity. Although it's often energizing and makes people restless, physical energy is not always prominent, and it may be less important at higher doses, so it's good to have the option of comfortably relaxing somewhere. General anxiolysis can occur, and in social settings you may be disinhibited. At light doses and early in the experience, it's been likened in some respects to a few drinks of alcohol. These effects are best experienced at light to common doses, because intense experiences can trigger anxiety and panic. If you feel less anxious and more social with a light dose, that doesn't mean more is better. Don't make the mistake of using more believing it'll enhance the effects, as it can easily do the opposite. Some have described sociable doses as superior to alcohol and benzodiazepines, but users must carefully experiment with small doses until they find the right amount, and not everyone will get these effects. The impact on mood is varied and includes euphoria, depression, and complete detachment from emotions. This suggests it could partly depend on anxiolysis and disinhibition. In this sense, it could be like benzodiazepines, in that significant mood enhancement is not a reliable effect, but it's more likely in people for whom anxiety and stress reduction is liberating. Ketamine is a well-validated antidepressant, and other dissociatives like DXM might have similar properties, but with 3-MeO-PCP, we don't have enough user reports, and it hasn't been studied, so it's unknown whether it has antidepressant properties. A few people have reported rapid alleviation of depression that lasts a few days, but a handful of reports doesn't tell us much. Regardless of being depressed, it can cause a 1 to 2 day afterglow with effects like elevated mood and a positive outlook, but that afterglow is distinct from the 3 to 7 day antidepressant effect of ketamine. With common to strong doses, complicated tasks will be difficult, and memory impairment is likely. People often forget what they were just about to do, they can't follow conversations or the plot of movies and TV shows, and they generally lose track of what's going on. Earlier parts of the experience might be hard to recall. For example, if you're focused on something for an hour, you may struggle to recall what you were doing before that activity. This can generate a sense of living in the perpetual now, where you're mostly aware of the present moment and perhaps things in the distant past, but not what happened in recent hours. At high doses, you may not understand what's going on and where you are, which can trigger significant anxiety. Having a sober, trusted friend present can be reassuring, reducing the chance of things getting out of control. Rarely will someone become unconscious. Even a heavy dose like 50 milligrams usually permits being awake, albeit greatly impaired with amnesia. Large doses could cause unconsciousness, but it shouldn't be expected at typical doses. And some reports of unconsciousness might involve memory impairment that causes people to think they were unconscious when they actually just failed to consolidate memories while awake. If you're looking for complete visual disconnection to enter a hallucinatory out-of-body state, as with ketamine, this isn't the right drug, and more importantly, it's not safe to try. Strong doses more often produce mania, psychosis, and delusions, and people usually don't become immobile, so they can still act out instead of lying down safely. Although it's a step down from full disconnection from external reality, there can be closed-eye experiences in which you see memories, landscapes, shapes, and patterns. You may also feel detached from your body, no longer distinguishing between yourself and the surrounding space, which can feel like you're floating in a boundless space. Light doses minimally affect vision, and in general, it shouldn't be expected to produce anything like a psychedelic experience. Instead, the primary open-eye visuals at common to strong doses are distortions of size, distance, shape, and clarity. Things can appear much closer or farther, and smaller or larger, and the effects can differ between items, with some appearing very large and close, while others appear small and distant. Also, reduced visual acuity is common, making your vision less clear. Some effects that are closer to that of psychedelics include increased brightness and intensification of colors. Hearing is often impaired, so things can sound distant, muffled, tinny, or mechanical, and generally of reduced quality. Music may be distorted such that all genres are unenjoyable or sound the same, but this is dose-dependent and varies between users. Especially with light to common doses, music is often more enjoyable and engaging. Your body may feel lighter, and when you move your limbs, they can feel almost weightless. But with the physical impairment at higher doses, this can be overridden such that it feels more difficult to move your body. Tactile perception is also dose-dependently impaired. Common to strong doses are frequently numbing, which contributes to analgesia, but with smaller doses you may experience tactile enhancement where things feel softer and smoother, for example. And some users experience a pleasant sensation of energy or vibration throughout their body. Like with sound and touch, your sense of taste and smell will usually be dose-dependently impaired. Time distortion is common and usually presents as time dilation, making it seem like events are occurring more slowly than they are. A short activity like sending a message or walking to another room can seem like it takes a while. Risky and compulsive redosing are an issue for some, mostly with common to strong doses and when people don't have a plan for how much they're going to take. Partly because of its tendency to cause overconfidence and overenthusiasm, you might impulsively redose, and you might also use more when a large dose makes you delusional, confused, or otherwise impaired. This often ends poorly since redosing is strongly linked to experiences going out of control. Because of the risks, it's best to take a single dose. If you still intend to use more, you should pre-prepare your doses and store the rest away, either with a friend or somewhere that'd be hard to access under the influence. Mostly at high doses, some users feel like their heart rate is high or their chest is tight. Based on the plentiful research on PCP and ketamine and some 3-MeO-PCP case reports, it likely causes a moderate increase in heart rate and blood pressure. A minority of users become focused on sensations that might be associated with the physiological effects. Anxiety and panic increase the likelihood of turning your focus to these sensations, whether they're real or imagined, and hyperfocusing on these sensations can further increase anxiety. Primarily with common to strong doses, speaking can be difficult due to slurring and feeling like you can't control your mouth and tongue. Tongue numbness probably contributes to how odd it can feel when attempting to speak. No matter the dose, objective impairment should be expected, and high-risk activities like driving should be completely avoided. At low to common doses, you might not feel impaired, but don't be fooled. The risk dose-dependently increases, as larger amounts can cause incoordination, unsteadiness, and other impairments that make movements like walking feel strange and difficult. Because you have a radically altered perception of your body, you may also think you're moving more unusually and are more impaired than you really are. With a low dose taken early in the day, you might return to normal by evening. Otherwise, it's common to be somewhat altered until you've slept, even if the main effects wore off hours before sleep. Some of the typical acute after effects are cognitive impairment, bodily numbness and lightness, impaired visual acuity and depth perception, and insomnia. With light to common doses, insomnia may only last a few hours longer than the main effects. Large doses and doses taken closer to sleep may prevent naturalistic sleep, causing it to be less restorative. How you feel the next day depends on dose and timing. With moderate doses that have not substantially disrupted sleep, there may be an afterglow consisting of better than usual outlook and perspective, enhanced mood, and anxiolysis. Not everyone experiences an afterglow, but so long as moderate doses are taken at a reasonable time, you'll typically avoid significant negative effects. When it's taken late in the day, sleep is disrupted, or large doses are used, you could wake up with cognitive impairment, such as memory impairment and brain fog, vision impairment like blurriness, lingering dissociation, and a general hangover feeling. Low doses can be mood-enhancing, stimulating, and motivating, which has caused people to use it frequently and even daily. Some people receive a large reduction in anxiety and depression, coupled with greater interest in both enjoyable and boring activities, and they may be more confident in their capabilities, producing a desire for self-improvement. Indeed, users have felt so alive and engaged that they've increased their commitment to exercise, work, and education. But even though frequent low-dose use can initially seem beneficial, it almost always ends poorly. The number of people describing it as amazing and life-changing in terms of enhancing their daily life is concerning. Some people feel like they're consistently having the best sober day of their life rather than feeling like they're on a drug, yet those feelings are deceptive. Self-evaluations of the drug can be deceptive in at least a couple ways. First, you may genuinely feel better, but if you continue your use, it can cause mood dysregulation, unusual behavior, mania, psychosis, and delusions. Second, positive experiences can be tainted by hypomania. You may believe the drug is more effective and benign than it really is, which can generate the belief that it's the cure for all of your mental ailments. How long it takes for problems to arise varies. Some have trouble within a week of daily use, while others use it on most days for a few months before encountering problems. Early on, the reports are glowing, but those same users often express the opposite opinion later on once it becomes obvious the drug is damaging. When you're on it, irrational redosing can be a problem, but normally the compulsions decrease upon stopping. When you're sober, the urge to go back is typically smaller than with drugs classically associated with addiction, although some people do use it in an addictive way. Even doses that don't acutely produce mania or psychosis can cause problems when taken day after day. For example, someone using 5 to 10 milligrams daily can find themselves slipping into delusional thought patterns as the weeks go by. Those thoughts may begin as odd ideas that can be ignored, but if it continues to be used, the thoughts become more complex, persistent, and harder to ignore. Eventually, people can act out in accordance with those irrational and delusional thoughts, which can be dangerous. The impact on mood also changes with frequent use, particularly when used on most days for weeks or longer. Mood dysregulation and irritability can occur. Initially, the drug can be consistently mood enhancing, but over time that changes to an unstable mood, with users oscillating between mood elevation and depression, and between strong emotions and detachment. It cannot be dosed safely without a milligram scale, and because it's active at the low milligram level, volumetric dosing is required when you're using a standard consumer-grade scale. Those scales are readable but not accurate at the milligram level. To get an acceptably accurate dose, weigh a larger amount, such as 50 or 100 milligrams, and then dissolve it in an appropriate solvent. For example, it could be dissolved in a solvent at a concentration of 5 milligrams per milliliter, then you can use an oral syringe to accurately dose the drug based on volume. Although these steps might be annoying, it's better to follow them than to accidentally use a much different dose than you wanted. Whether this is batch specific is unclear, but some users find it's irritating to sensitive areas when using routes that involve extended contact with the drug. It may cause discomfort and temporary tissue damage in the nose and rectum and in the mouth when taken sublingually. Oral use tends to cause more dissociation, confusion, and impairment, whereas intranasal use may cause more stimulation and a somewhat clearer headspace, but also more mania. These distinctions become less important at higher doses, since each route can produce strong dissociative effects when enough is used. Because of the intranasal route's effect profile and kinetics, compulsive redosing might be more of an issue. The dose range associated with the largest number of positive and relatively safe experiences is around 5 to 15 milligrams. You should try light doses first and slowly increase during subsequent experiences. Large dose increases are risky because it only takes a few milligrams to greatly increase the intensity. Compared with many drugs, the oral onset is slower, so you might be minimally affected for around 90 minutes. Because of the slow onset, you should avoid redosing based on how it feels during the first 2 hours. The onset is fast faster with intranasal use, but slower than you might expect, so it's best to avoid redosing for at least 45 to 60 minutes. Several users have said it feels caustic and produces pain, a burning or stinging sensation, and rhinorrhea. Bleeding may occur, but the risk is low unless you're already experiencing nasal irritation or you're using the drug many times. Others find it's easy to insufflate and not that uncomfortable compared with other drugs. The inconsistent reports could indicate variable product quality, but that's just speculation. Those who find it painful to insufflate may still experience nasal numbing once they've taken multiple doses, and those who find it relatively comfortable have sometimes reported numbing with 1 or 2 doses. There are far fewer reports of rectal use, so the dosing and timeline info isn't reliable enough to specify. It should be expected to be slightly more potent than oral use. The onset may be faster, perhaps around 20 to 45 minutes, and the duration may lie between oral and intranasal. Overall, the effects seem to be closer to oral use, but with faster kinetics. 3-MeO-PCP is a methoxylated derivative of PCP, and both are in the aryl cyclohexylamine class of dissociatives. Their primary constituents are a cyclohexane ring, a heterocyclic nitrogen-containing piperidine ring, and a phenyl ring. 3-MeO-PCP only differs from PCP by the substitution of a methoxy group at carbon 3 of the phenyl ring. This substitution makes it slightly more potent, whereas methoxylation at carbon 4 to produce 4-MeO-PCP greatly reduces potency. There are many cases of cross-reaction with immunoassays for PCP, so urine drug tests looking for PCP can detect recent 3-MeO-PCP use. This was seen in one of the largest collections of 3-MeO-PCP intoxication cases. 53 urine samples known to contain 3 and/or 4-MeO-PCP were analyzed, and 85% tested positive in a PCP immunoassay. It has a high affinity for NMDA receptors, where it appears to interact with the region that's also targeted by ketamine and PCP. We don't have all the details about the interaction, but it probably functions as an open-channel, voltage-dependent, uncompetitive antagonist. This means it binds inside NMDA receptors once the neuronal membrane voltage begins to change. This voltage change releases magnesium ions that block most NMDA receptor channels at rest. There's been speculation about dopaminergic and opioidergic properties, but the evidence doesn't really support either. Research conducted as part of the National Institute of Mental Health's psychoactive drug screening program found no meaningful interaction with the mu opioid receptor, kappa opioid receptor, dopamine receptors, and the dopamine transporter. Beyond the NMDA receptor, it has a high affinity for the sigma-1 receptor and a fairly high affinity for the serotonin transporter, which could potentially add a serotonergic component to the effects. For comparison, ketamine has a lower affinity for NMDA receptors and lacks the serotonin transporter interaction, and PCP has a slightly lower affinity for NMDA receptors and a lower affinity for the serotonin transporter than 3-MeO-PCP. However, these details are not definitive, so comparisons between drugs based on a small amount of binding data isn't very insightful. There are some divergent results in the available studies, including research that shows 3-MeO-PCP has a high affinity for the kappa opioid receptor and a lower affinity for the serotonin transporter. Because we don't have much human or animal research, less is known about its kinetics and metabolism. In a couple cases, multiple blood samples were taken during hospitalization, allowing for estimates of its half-life. The estimated half-life was 11 hours in one case and 10 hours in the other. Using live rats and human liver microsomes, metabolism was shown to involve hydroxylation at the cyclohexyl and piperidine rings and O-demethylation. In rats who received a dose that roughly corresponds to 60 milligrams in humans, there were 30 phase 1 metabolites and 7 phase 2 glucuronide metabolites. In vitro research with human liver microsomes showed that the enzyme CYP2B6 was most involved in hydroxylation, with some contribution from CYP2C19 for piperidine hydroxylation, whereas O-demethylation was catalyzed by CYP2C19, 2B6, and 2D6. Another study with human liver microsomes identified 5 metabolites, 4 of which were present in urine from 2 fatalities. They were generated by piperidine and cyclohexyl hydroxylation, with or without O-demethylation. O-demethylation yields 3-hydroxy-PCP, which appeared to be a major metabolite in those fatality cases, and it was also tentatively identified in blood from a 3rd fatality. Because 3-hydroxy-PCP is a similarly potent dissociative, it might contribute to the effects. The synthesis of two related isomers, 4-MeO-PCP and 2-MeO-PCP, was published in 1965 as part of an investigation into potential CNS depressants, and in 1979, the synthesis of 3-MeO-PCP was first reported. It was largely confined to occasional research for 2 decades, until John Q. Beagle, a pseudonymous member of the online drug forum The Hive, first described its effects in 1999. Beagle said its effects were extremely similar to PCP in potency and quality. A decade later, it gained a foothold in the research chemical market, with one of the earliest reports coming from a bluelight.org user in 2009. By 2011, more online vendors were selling it, and more people were writing about their experiences, many of which were positive. An analysis of 85,000 threads on drugsforum.com revealed that discussion about 3-MeO-PCP picked up around 2011, peaked from 2011 to 2013, and significantly dropped by early 2016. The first notification about the drug to the EU's early warning system on novel drugs, which is operated by the EMCDDA and Europol, came from the UK in March 2012. A project that monitors novel drugs in Sweden, called Strida, detected it in 2013 and continued seeing cases through early 2015. It became regulated in Sweden in the second quarter of 2015 and was not detected by Strida after that point, although Strida's data collection period ended in early 2016, so we only know up to that point. 251 drug products from Strida cases between 2010 and 2015 were analyzed, and 7 contained 3-MeO-PCP in the form of powders and liquids. There was also a misrepresentation case where the suspected drug was 3-MeO-PCP, but instead, flubromazole was the primary drug. Fatalities were published by the mid-2010s, and among the earliest were 3 deaths in Sweden in October 2014. A survey of bluelight.org users between November 2014 and February 2015 found that among 619 respondents who had collectively taken 177 novel drugs, 3-MeO-PCP was the 19th most popular substance. Its use was reported 19 times, compared with the 110 reports for MXE, the most popular substance. It was generally described positively, with users indicating it was not very addictive, but scored high for how much people appreciated the effects and how likely they were to use it again. Its modest popularity was also supported by a paper that looked at listings on 22 darknet markets between 2015 and 2016. Snapshots of those markets were taken bi-monthly, collectively capturing 256 novel drugs. Most were only available inconsistently, but 3-MeO-PCP was among 61 drugs that appeared in every snapshot, suggesting it was more popular than many novel drugs. As of 2021, it remains a popular research chemical dissociative. This legality information only covers a few countries, and drug laws frequently change, so you should always check your local laws before doing anything with 3-MeO-PCP. It's prohibited in Australia because PCP is a Schedule 9 substance, and there are broad drug analog laws at the federal and state level that apply to it. Federally, PCP is Schedule 1 in Canada, along with its salts, derivatives, and analogs, which likely includes 3-MeO-PCP. It's a Class B drug in the UK because there's a ban on aryl cyclohexylamine dissociatives. It's unscheduled in the US, but it's a close analog of the Schedule 2 drug PCP and may be covered by the Federal Analog Act when it's intended for human consumption. At typical doses, it increases heart rate and blood pressure, but its primary risks are psychological, such as mania, delusions, and psychosis, that could cause dangerous behavior. People have been hospitalized, arrested, and injured, usually after taking large amounts or using it for days. Although these problems are especially notable with 3-MeO-PCP, if you stick with the light to common doses and avoid multi-day use, the risk is relatively low. Also, the risks may be elevated in people with psychiatric disorders, including bipolar disorder and psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, so people with those conditions are best off avoiding the drug. Some of the physical risks of an overdose are rapid muscle breakdown, called rhabdomyolysis, and seizures, but they're rare. A number of non-fatal and fatal cases have been published, and they essentially confirm that it has a similar risk profile to drugs like PCP. Out of 56 people who used 3-MeO-PCP, 11 who used 4-MeO-PCP, and 8 who used both, the most common symptoms were hypertension, tachycardia, and altered mental status, like confusion, disorientation, dissociation, and hallucinations. Among the 7 who only had 3-MeO-PCP in their system, there were 2 instances each for agitation, nystagmus, renal deficiency, and meiosis, and 1 instance each for pupils not responding to light or responding slowly, rhabdomyolysis, and diaphoresis. Around half of the patients were treated with benzodiazepines, and hospitalization only lasted 1 to 2 days for 85%. Among the 7 who only tested positive for 3-MeO-PCP, PCP, 2 were observed in the ICU, and hospitalization never lasted beyond 2 days. This shows that even when use leads to hospitalization, the typical hemodynamic and mental symptoms are easy to manage. The mental effects can be very uncomfortable, but so long as someone is observed in a safe setting, the impact is not severe, nor are the effects life-threatening in most cases. We can get an idea of how large overdoses affect people from a case published in 2019, in which a 17-year-old reportedly used 200 milligrams orally because he mistakenly referred to dosing information for 4-MeO PCP. He alternated between hypotonia and hypertonia, and also had agitation, limb tremor, hypertension, tachycardia, dysarthria, nystagmus, and slightly elevated creatine kinase, which is associated with muscle damage. He was treated with midazolam and sedating antipsychotics. Within 24 hours, most of the symptoms were alleviated. 3-MeO PCP has also shown up in over a dozen fatalities, but it's rarely been the sole cause of death. Other drugs were usually present, and in one case, a user with a history of mental disorders took various drugs and committed suicide, so we don't know what role 3-MeO PCP played. It can certainly be deadly, but with the doses people normally use, even when they take excessively large doses, the greatest concerns are psychological and behavioral. If people can make it through the effect period without hurting themselves or others, things will usually resolve without much trouble. I've only included a few cases and details in this video, but the article includes all of the cases I could find, so if you want more details, you'll find them there. Tolerance develops quickly and can last longer than with many other drugs. At light to common doses, it may provide largely similar effects for a few days, and perhaps longer if you're looking for non-dissociative effects like energy, mood enhancement, and anxiolysis. But the full dissociative effects associated with common to strong doses become harder to attain within a few days, and with substantial use like low to common doses daily or high doses taken weekly for months or years, some tolerance can last for months and possibly longer. When you stop taking it after an extended period of use, benefits like mood enhancement and increased motivation can flip around for days to weeks. You may experience low mood, anhedonia, a persistent sense of disconnection from your body and environment, and low motivation. Whether it's from toxicity or as a byproduct of dissociation, lack of interest, and low mood, you may feel cognitively impaired, often with memory impairment and struggling to find the right words to use in conversation. Withdrawal is minimal to non-existent when it's taken for less than a few days. That kind of use is associated with little more than subjective cognitive impairment and a hangover feeling for a couple of days. I'll discuss some of the main interactions, but there could be many others, and we know little about how it interacts with most drugs, so it's best to avoid combinations. Benzodiazepines are used to counter negative effects like anxiety and insomnia. Although they help in some cases, they're not recommended, especially when common to strong doses of 3-MeO PCP have been used. They can exacerbate disinhibition, confusion, cognitive impairment, and physical impairment, increasing the chance of poor decision-making and injury. Both drugs also come with redosing issues. On top of compulsive redosing, you may have an impaired memory of how much you've taken and how long it's been since either drug was used, so you could end up taking dangerously large amounts of either drug by mistake. Using low to common doses and being with a trusted sober friend is a better strategy for reducing anxiety, paranoia, and bad decision making. And if you lose control of your behavior, you can be better treated in a medical setting where benzodiazepines are safer to administer. It's often used with cannabis, and while this can be a good combination, a lot of caution is warranted. Even a little cannabis can greatly increase the effects, which may be a problem, particularly in people who are not long-term cannabis users. And while you may feel comfortable with cannabis and think it'll be fine, often that's not how things turn out. It can increase open and closed eye visuals, music enhancement, introspection, and elevated mood, but it can also trigger anxiety and paranoia, along with more psychotic, manic, and delusional effects. The best general recommendation is to avoid this combination. Those who try it should be experienced with cannabis, and they should begin with very small amounts, ideally combined with no more than a light to common dose of 3-MeO PCP. Some people enjoy low doses combined with up to a few drinks, including in social settings where the effects can be additive or synergistic, but this largely has the same risks as benzodiazepines, and alcohol is more concerning in some respects. The negative effects include impaired decision-making, physical impairment, and memory loss. Alcohol also has a tendency to cause vomiting breathing, which makes it more dangerous. When you're very impaired or unconscious, vomit aspiration may occur, which can be deadly from airway blockage and can also cause aspiration pneumonia. It's best to avoid this combination, and if it is used, both drugs should not go beyond their respective light to common doses. GHB, GBL, and BDO have similar risks to benzodiazepines and alcohol, so it's wise to avoid them. Tramadol's pharmacology includes opioid and SNRI components, so it comes with classic opioid-type risks, such as respiration depression, unconsciousness, physical and cognitive impairment, and vomit aspiration, and it also increases the risk of seizures. Among the risks of opioids are deep unconsciousness, vomit aspiration, cognitive impairment, respiratory depression, and physical impairment. With psychostimulants like amphetamines and cocaine, there may be an additive cardiovascular effect, further increasing heart rate and blood pressure, and the cardiac effects of cocaine may be more concerning. Stimulants can also increase the risk of mania, psychosis, and delusions. You can find more information in the TDC article, either on the website or by downloading the PDF. Thank you to all of TDC's supporters. Your contributions make this content possible.